on the move. President Donald Trump heads to Texas. What he said to the media about the coronavirus and the unrest in Portland. Capitol grilling. Lawmakers asked the CEOs of 4 major tech companies about privacy, antitrust, and bias claims. China and the Vatican. A report says state-backed hackers targeted the Holy See, how Beijing is responding. And marking a milestone, why Orthodox churches in Moscow rang their bells at the exact same time. On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, July 29th, 2020. Good evening, and thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. The Trump administration says that it has reached a deal with Oregon to control violent protests in Portland. But President Donald Trump says federal officers will not pull out until the city is safe. He has harsh words for those political leaders and new comments about treatments for COVID-19. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
Tracy, today President Trump went to Texas to do some fundraising. Meanwhile, his administration released a plan to bring calm to Portland.
President Donald Trump on Portland's daily violence.
These are bad people. These are anarchists. They're agitators.
And before leaving the White House this morning, he called out local leaders there.
But they're very weak people. They're very weak people. These radicals, these anarchists are controlling the governor and the mayor.
And now the Department of Homeland Security says it has agreed to a plan with Oregon to bring the peace, stating in a news release that plan includes a robust presence of Oregon State Police in downtown Portland. The department will maintain our current augmented federal law enforcement personnel in Portland until we are assured that federal properties will no longer be attacked. The governor's response on Twitter: the federal government has agreed to withdraw federal officers from Portland. They have acted as an occupying force and brought violence. Portland's mayor says federal agents were never invited and never wanted.
All of us agree here in the city of Portland that their presence here has made things much worse and that escalation is merely leading to more escalation.
Our purpose there is only to protect our federal buildings, which we're doing with no problem.
Also making headlines, the coronavirus pandemic in the U.S. now close to 150,000 dead. The president remains optimistic a vaccine will be developed along with other treatments.
Well, I'm a therapeutic person too, to be honest. I love the idea of therapeutics where you go in, you give somebody a transfusion or a shot, and they get better. I am a big therapeutic person.
Also, Representative Louis Gohmert of Texas, a Republican, was supposed to go on that trip to Texas with President Trump, but he had to cancel because he tested positive for coronavirus. He is at least the 10th member of Congress known to have tested positive. He is 66 years old. Tracy?
White House correspondent Owen Jensen reporting for us tonight. Thank you so much, Owen. As U.S. lawmakers continue to negotiate over the next COVID-19 aid bill, stark differences remain between the $3 trillion proposal from Democrats and the $1 trillion counteroffer from Republicans. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales reports. Eric?
Well, Tracy, Republicans say that they want a comprehensive plan by the end of this week. But as the two parties muddle through negotiations, current protections are set to expire. Some have already expired, and time is running out to reach a deal.
The Senate Republican proposal for the next phase of COVID relief is not a useful starting point.
Talks are progressing slowly, but criticism from both parties is abundant.
The legislative train wreck by Senate Republicans cannot derail our efforts to provide urgent, comprehensive, and necessary relief to the American people.
If the Democrats don't get to continue taxing essential workers to pay other people more to stay home, then nobody gets a dime. To put it gently, Madam President, that's a completely unhinged position.
For school reopenings, Republicans want to spend $105 billion. Democrats want 4 times that amount. Republicans also want money for school choice, publicly funded vouchers given to low-income families to help them pay tuition at private school. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops supports school choice, emailing, quote, "Please contact your senators today to request support of the Alexander Scott School Choice Now Act, Democrats object to Leader McConnell's push for liability protections.
This liability provision he put on there is McConnell liability on steroids. He has taken it to a whole other place.
But Senator McConnell repeats the bill's liability protections are necessary.
There is no chance, there's zero chance, America can get back to normal without the Cornyn liability protection. And no bill will be put on the Senate floor that does not include it.
One area of common ground is that there should be another round of $1,200 stimulus checks directly to Americans. That's for Americans who are earning less than $75,000 a year. Meanwhile, the negotiations continue throughout the evening. Tracy?
Okay, thank you so much, Eric. Correspondent Eric Rosales reporting from Capitol Hill tonight. Democratic Congressman Jan Schakowsky introduced a bill today to repeal the pro-life Helms Amendment.
This is an effort that we are not going to give up until we win.
The Helms Amendment passed into law in 1973, the same year as the Roe versus Wade ruling. The Helms Amendment prevents U.S. taxpayer money from funding abortions in foreign countries. The House Democrats' so-called pro-choice caucus wants American aid dollars to fund abortions without restrictions. Pro-life group Susan B. Anthony List calls this attempt to repeal the Helms Amendment reckless. Also on Capitol Hill today, the heads of big tech companies face some tough questions. Jeff Bezos of Amazon, Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook, Apple's Tim Cook, and Google CEO Sundar Pichai all participated by remote video, as did some congressmen. The House Judiciary Subcommittee wants to know if the big tech corporations are too dominant in their industries. The hearing is part of an investigation into competition in the digital marketplace. The Pentagon is pulling 12,000 troops out of Germany. More than half will come home. The rest will be deployed to other European countries. President Donald Trump has said that he wants to reduce the number of troops in Germany to 25,000. U.S. troops at a couple of bases in the Persian Gulf were put on alert overnight after Iran launched missiles as part of a drill. Iran's paramilitary Revolutionary Guard fired ballistic missiles from underground launchers. It is part of an exercise involving a mock aircraft carrier, but it is a clear message to the United States. The American base in Abu Dhabi and the U.S. base in Qatar temporarily went on alert over the launches. Catholic bishops in Scotland are speaking out about the country's proposed hate crime law. They fear the measure could criminalize both the Bible and the Catechism of the Catholic Church. The proposal would make it a crime to stir up hatred against any group, including those based on sexual orientation and those of transgender identity. Both the Vatican and the Catholic Diocese of Hong Kong are the targets of hackers allegedly backed by the Chinese Communist government. The Chinese Foreign Ministry calls the report, quote, groundless speculation. Chinese officials deny the allegations. A report from the digital monitoring group Recorded Future claims that since May, hackers have spread malware and accessed church offices in Hong Kong, as well as servers at the Vatican. In just over a month, the Holy See and China are scheduled to hold talks to negotiate how the church will cooperate with the Chinese Communist regime. Joining me now with more on this story is Ed Condon, D.C. Bureau Chief for Catholic News Agency and a canon lawyer. Ed, thanks for joining us. Great to see you.
Always a pleasure.
And I know that you've been following this story very closely. What do we know exactly about the information that the hackers were hoping to get, and were they successful?
Well, we don't know exactly how successful they have been, but we do know certainly some of the things they're looking to get access to. I mean, it's not a coincidence that the Diocese of Hong Kong and various Catholic groups on Hong Kong, like the Hong Kong Study Mission, as well as the Holy See Secretariat of State and other agencies within the Vatican, are being targeted at this time. There's a wealth of sensitive information, particularly about how the Diocese of Hong Kong relates to the Holy See and the Vatican, that's very much become a hot topic right now. now. There's a new national security law that's just been imposed on Hong Kong by the mainland. And one of the chief concerns that Catholics have raised in the diocese is that the relationship between the diocese and the Vatican will be treated as foreign collusion under this national security measure. And we know very much that the Chinese government, the Chinese Communist Party, is desperately interested in monitoring the communications between bishops in China and Rome.
Ed, do we know how they did it, how they were able to hack into the systems?
Well, there have been a couple of different ways that were outlined in the report, but most of them come around what I think we're calling spear phishing exercises, which is emails or documents are sent to people within these organizations. They're encouraged to sort of click the link or open the document, which then imports malware onto the system and basically lets the spy bug loose in the Vatican server. Now, in some cases, these have been fairly sophisticated-looking documents that they've used. I think in one case there was a letter expressing condolences from senior figures at the Secretariat of State, including Cardinal Parolin and Archbishop Edgar Piñapara, the Sustituto there, to a Monsignor in Hong Kong on the occasion of the death of another priest. It's not clear whether that was in fact an authentic document that these hackers got a hold of and then, if you like, corrupted electronically to import the malware software into it or not. But these are the kind of sophisticated techniques that are being used.
Ed, we don't have much time, but I'm curious, has the Vatican responded to the report?
No, not yet. We've asked the Secretary of State to comment. We've asked Cardinal Parolin for his comments. There hasn't been any response yet, but this is obviously an extremely sensitive issue at an extremely sensitive time. The Vatican-China provisional deal expires in September, and negotiations are already underway for how that deal is going to be carried forward.
Well, Ed, thanks so much for your time. We really appreciate it. Edward Condon, D.C. Bureau Chief for Catholic News Agency. Thanks again, Ed.
Always a pleasure.
Coming up, Venezuela President Nicolas Maduro makes a request of the country's Catholic leaders. Plus, a closer look at Catholic schools and whether they will hold in-person classes this fall. This month, for the first time in 17 years, the United States resumed federal executions, renewing national debate over the morality of the practice. In July, 3 men were killed by lethal injection, and another execution is scheduled for August. Joining me now to help us examine this topic from a Catholic perspective is Father Thomas Petrie, moral theologian and professor at the Dominican House of Studies in Washington, D.C. He is also co-host of the Church Alive Saturday mornings on EWTN Radio. Father, welcome back. So good to see you again.
It's always good to be with you, Tracy.
So, Father, let's begin with church teaching. What exactly does it say when it comes to the death penalty?
The Church has traditionally taught that states have a right, when guilt is absolutely known and if the crime is serious and grave, to inflict the penalty of death. However, since Pope St. Paul VI, every pope has preached and taught that the death penalty in the modern world is inadmissible, which is the word now that Pope Francis has used in a revision of the Catechism of the Catholic Church. This is because the primary purpose of punishment is what we call retribution. But even that word retribution is no longer understood by most people. It doesn't mean revenge. It means that, well, the punishment should fit the crime, that the offender creates a disorder in society that needs to be redressed. Rehabilitation is a secondary purpose, as is deterrence and protecting society. However, it seems Pope Francis believes that most people today have a different understanding of penal sanctions. And I would say that's true on both sides of this issue, that those who are in favor of the death penalty tend to see retribution as more of a revenge or a lust for pain and suffering in the perpetrator, whereas those who are on the other side of the debate on the death penalty tend to see retribution as something that is insignificant or not worthy of consideration.
Well, Father, one of the men executed this month, as you know, Dustin Lee Honkin, died as a Catholic who devoted his life to Jesus in prison. What should we bear in mind when it comes to the issues of forgiveness and redemption?
Well, remember, as Christians, we are called to forgive. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean the state is called to forgive, but that we as individuals are called to forgive and to pray. In these cases, certainly for the victims of these horrible crimes, but also to pray for the perpetrators, for the criminals themselves, that they be converted, so that they might come to know the forgiveness of God and to love God and to give their lives over to God. It seems that, in heaven, we might be walking around with murderers and thieves and prostitutes. This is the kingdom of God that Jesus proclaimed.
Well, we know the U.S. bishops have been very vocal about this issue, even appealing to the president to stop the practice of execution. Now, at this moment, though, there is another execution scheduled next month. What can we as Catholics do?
I think as Catholics, certainly we need to pray once, as I say, for the victims and to pray for those scheduled to die because of the death penalty. But we also need to work through our legislative process to contact our legislators, both state and federal legislators, our state representatives and federal representatives, to work to abolish the death penalty. I mean, this is what the Holy Father and I think rightly is suggesting that in the modern world, especially in developed countries, that the death penalty no longer serves the purpose that the church traditionally thought it could, which is to restore order to society, simply because we as citizens don't really understand the concept of justice and order anymore. And so the death penalty has been reduced to simply vengeance and the infliction of pain. St. Thomas Aquinas says no punishment can be inflicted for the sake of causing pain. It must always be inflicted for the sake of causing restoration of order in God's sight.
Well, thank you so much, Father. We appreciate your insight always. Father Thomas Petrie, professor at the Dominican House of Studies in Washington, D.C., and also co-host of the Church Alive Saturday mornings on EWTN Radio. Thank you again.
Thank you, Tracy.
Catholic leaders in Venezuela have criticized the president's handling of the coronavirus pandemic. And now President Nicolas Maduro says churches should be loaned to Venezuela's health services as the number of new COVID-19 cases increases. Churches remain closed for Mass in Venezuela, but Catholics still show up outside to pray. Returning to school in the fall is no doubt going to look different. Coronavirus concerns are changing the education landscape, and Catholic schools across the country are grappling with how to reopen safely. Correspondent Mark Irons reports. Mark?
Tracy, Catholic schools are mapping their plans to return amid various state directives. For example, in Florida, the governor ordered schools to fully reopen this fall semester. He was actually sued by a teachers union over that. But in California, there's another kind of frustration with that state's governor who is mandating virtual learning throughout the state.
I have two young boys.
In addition to being a father concerned about his children's education, Paul Escala oversees the largest Catholic school system in the U.S. He's the school superintendent for the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. Superintendent Escala is disappointed California's governor is requiring distance learning for schools.
We opened bars, we opened nightclubs, we opened nail salons, we opened hair salons, but we didn't open schools. And now we close those businesses down again, and kids are still at home. So when will kids get their chance?
Superintendent Escala says student safety is key, but he believes it can still be achieved with in-person education. According to the Centers for Disease Control, behind California, Florida has the highest number of coronavirus cases.
We're monitoring the situation daily.
The Catholic Diocese of Pensacola-Tallahassee announced it will reopen schools 2 weeks later than planned. With safety measures in place, the diocese feels students greatly benefit from in-person learning socially, cognitively, and spiritually.
We feel that their spiritual growth is vital to them. Educating the whole child, and spiritually is a big part of that.
Meanwhile, just outside the nation's capital, the Diocese of Arlington, Virginia is moving ahead with plans to reopen school doors. Virtual options have been created as well.
But we just did a meeting the other day with all the principals. The bishop was there. Safety for the students and for the teachers is the number one thing.
Dr. Joe Vorbach, the superintendent of Catholic schools, says interest in Catholic education has increased.
I have to assume that families are interested in options that would allow their children to return to school.
And Fairfax County, a county within the Diocese of Arlington, says its public schools will begin the school year with all virtual learning. And Tracy, an update from Vermont. The CDC says that state has the lowest number of coronavirus cases. The Diocese of Burlington there plans for in-person learning this coming school year. Tracy.
Okay, thank you so much, Mark. Correspondent Mark Irons reporting for us tonight. Well, Catholic College in Louisiana has received a $20 million donation from an anonymous source. Xavier University of Louisiana says the gift will allow it to expand scholarships and sustain its mission. Xavier University is the country's only Catholic and historically black university. Up next, an art historian tells us about the history of the depictions of Jesus. Plus, how Orthodox churches in Moscow celebrated a milestone. Controversies over the legacy of racism in America have even flared up criticism of the image of Jesus Christ. Last month, Sean King, an activist with the Black Lives Matter movement, wrote on Twitter, "All murals and stained glass windows of white Jesus and his European mother and their white friends should also come down. They are a gross form of white supremacy." Joining us now to give us more insight on this subject is Elizabeth Lev, art historian and author living in Rome. Liz, so good to see you again. Thanks for coming on.
Oh, it's great to be here.
Liz, so talk about how Jesus has been depicted over the centuries.
Well, I think what's really interesting is that there have been arguments about how Jesus has been depicted over the centuries. I mean, there was a whole question about whether or not to depict Jesus to begin with, and then how to depict him. We find basically Christians started making images in the 3rd century AD, and they started to make images of Jesus. They used symbols they were so nervous about it. Everybody knows the fish symbol or the Good Shepherd or the key row. And then they gradually began to create an image that would be more of an idea than an actual physical likeness of Christ. So we would have a youthful image to represent a god or a bearded image to represent a teacher. So the image of Jesus was in flux for many, many centuries.
Do we really know what he looked like? And do you think it's wrong to portray him or the Holy Family with a different nationality?
I think it's a really important question. What did he look like, and how worried we are about what he looked like? Because after all, the gospel is very descriptive, and yet it's not descriptive about what Jesus looked like. And as a matter of fact, ideas about what Jesus looked like don't really come into vogue until the image of the Shroud of Turin and the Holy Veil, which starts circulating in the Middle Ages, and people start thinking about the historical face of Jesus. So this idea of what Jesus looks like is something that really is a later manifestation. Insofar as what somatic features Jesus has, whether Jesus is white, if he's black, if he's Asian, we have to bear in mind where the highest amount of artistic production regarding images of Jesus took place. It took place in the Mediterranean and eventually moved its way up into Europe. So we shouldn't be surprised if a Michelangelo, a Raphael, a Leonardo, a Botticelli makes Jesus in an ideal form based in his world. But when images of Jesus go to other countries, Jesus begins to morph and change into the ideal form of those nationalities.
Liz, we don't have a lot of time, but I'm curious, has artwork of Christ been important to evangelization over the years?
Artwork of Christ is fundamental to evangelization. That's, in fact, the reason why the Christians decided to make images of Jesus. And when those images of the Madonna and Child or the suffering Christ went around the world, the fundamental message is the Word became flesh. God became man. He took on human form, not so much to be concerned about what his eyes or color or hair looked like, but the fact that he understands our human experience. So whether the image of Jesus suffering on the cross has the face of an African or an Asian, the most important thing is that everybody in the world can feel united to a Jesus who understands human suffering, a God who knows what every single human being goes through. And this is what art allows us to do.
Liz, thank you so much for your insight. Always appreciate it. Elizabeth Lev, art historian and author. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you.
And finally tonight, the head of Russia's Orthodox Church led celebrations yesterday marking Christianity's arrival to Russia more than 1,000 years ago. Russian Orthodox Patriarch Kirill said the Christianization of Russia was a truly revolutionary event. Bells rang out at the Cathedral of Christ the Savior in Moscow. Christianity took hold in the region in the year 988 when Vladimir the Great was baptized. There were also celebrations in other Russian cities. We thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.